Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the show. Thanks for being with us. I'm also a member of the Iowa Senate. I represent Iowa City, and just this past week, actually this is being taped on January 15th for those of you seeing this around the state, the new governor, Tom Vilsack, gave his first State of the State address, which focused on a variety of issues of interest to Iowans, including healthy communities, how we should focus the tobacco dollars, safe communities, and also environmental quality. In fact, the governor quoted Aldo Leopold in his State of the State, something we haven't seen in many addresses from our governor of Iowa. That's the topic tonight, in the environment. And our guest is Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson is now the not-so-new director of the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. He's been serving for the last year, one of Governor Vilsack's first appointments, widely heralded in really a bipartisan way. Paul's been involved in the environmental movement in a variety of ways. He served in the Iowa General Assembly. He's been responsible for some of our landmark legislation, including the Iowa Groundwater Protection Act, our energy efficiency laws, Resource Enhancement and Protection Act, also known as REAP, and most recently served under in one of President Clinton's administrations as the director of the Natural Resource Conservation Service. This man has some experiences. Recently, Paul, thanks for being with us first.
It's good to be here.
I had a meeting with Paul in Iowa City a few weeks ago, expecting our new director to pull up in a shiny four-wheel drive SUV. I was surprised to see Paul show up in his Honda Civic, getting about 45 miles to the gallon. And he not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. Paul, what have you learned in the first year as director of the department?
And in fact, it is the first year. I think January 15th, the day we're taping this, is exactly 1 year. Well, for one thing, I've learned that Iowans care about their resources. Everybody has an opinion on what we should do with white-tailed deer, or what we should do with underground storage tanks or hog facilities. Of course, not everybody agrees, but people certainly care about their resources in this state. You know, I had 4 years in Washington heading up a great agency, but I'm finding this one much more difficult than that job, simply because people care so much. And I would hate to see it any other way.
Some people would say that you've inherited a job that we've kind of neglected in terms of the environment over the last number of years. There hasn't been sufficient focus on it, and we've accumulated a handful of problems. Some of those problems we'll talk about in a minute. What's the state of the department right now, in your judgment, to tackle some of these issues?
Well, we certainly are not what we ought to be. We probably invest less in ourselves in Iowa, in terms of the environment, in terms of public lands as well as any state in the union. In fact, I saw numbers the other day that showed that we rank 51 out of 51 states and Puerto Rico in the number of people we have in environmental protection in relation to the number of people we have in our state. So in that respect, it's not good. On the other hand, we need to understand that Iowa will not be a healthy state simply because it has a good DNR. It will be that way because the people of Iowa want to make it that way. And fortunately, we've got a lot of good people in Iowa.
Paul, there's a very aggressive legislative agenda that you've put out through the Environmental Protection Commission, Natural Resource Commission, and support from the governor. The major initiatives, the Water Quality Initiative on the farm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The major initiative is calling for another real burst of activity on water quality. We did that back in the 80s. I think we made a difference. Today, our landfills operate much better than they did then. Of course, they're not perfect, but we've done much better. Our underground storage tanks are better than they were. In many cases, our agriculture is doing a better job of fine-tuning its use of chemical inputs. So we did make a difference, and we think it's time to take the next step. As we look at our needs today, they're more directed towards surface waters, our rivers and streams, our lakes. In fact, we have over 50,000 miles of rivers and streams in this state. Most people don't view us that way, but we are. Although we think we've made some improvements over the years, we also believe we know how to accelerate that improvement. So we're going to focus on primarily land use, on everything from floodplains and doing better management of our floodplains. That means urban as well as rural. We think that We have some new ideas with things such as vegetative buffers along rivers and streams. We can draw down federal funds to do that, to work with farmers. Restoring small wetlands, especially in north central Iowa, where agriculture depends on drainage. If we get that water up out of those drain pipes and into small wetlands, natural processes can work, and perhaps Des Moines can have drinking water that isn't very high in nitrates again. We want to organize people around their watersheds. We, again, as I mentioned earlier, believe that it's up to local people to take better care of their land and their resources. We find that we do that when people come together around those issues. We also want to improve our water monitoring program. We began that last year. The legislature put the first down payment on that, and we're ready to take the next step in that arena as well.
The idea of buffer strips along streams and rivers in Iowa has been kicked around for a long time, and there's always this political cry that goes out that, you know, there'll be no support for it. Essentially what's being proposed here is a way to entice, through some funding from the feds and state, farmers, private landowners, basically where all the land's owned, to get involved. What do you think the take on this is going to be from the legislature, and do you think we're going to see farmers actually get involved in signing up for it?
I should ask you what the take is going to be on the legislature, of course, but I think that they will be very responsive to it. We have some experience in this now. We began when I was in Washington 4 years ago to really push the vegetative buffer work. In fact, in Iowa, we have some of the best research in the nation to show that it works. Putting grass strips along rivers and streams, or perhaps on the contour or on field borders and so on. It breaks the movement of water and soils as it approaches rivers and streams. Iowa, in fact, today has about 160,000 acres. About 1 in 5 farmers right now are already using this technology. The farmer can enroll it in a conservation reserve program and be paid ag rental rate, and in some cases a premium on top of that, if they're willing to do it. In the past, our conservation reserve looked at taking whole farms out of production. Today, we think that the approach really ought to be to focus like a laser, if you will, on those areas along rivers and streams. So every farm perhaps could have a little bit of this kind of a program. But the problem is to get it implemented, you've got to go door to door. You've got to go farm to farm. You can't sit at the office and wait. Those who wanted it really badly have come into the office. They now have their lands enrolled. What we're proposing is to get very proactive and to get out there and knock on doors. We can get retired farmers to do it. We can get groups like Pheasants Forever to get out and do it. And we think if we do, it'll really make a difference.
So good outreach makes sense here.
Oh, yes.
That's key.
No question about it. You know, we've always had a voluntary program working with landowners, and it's worked fairly well. Fly across the country and look down, and wherever you look, you will see contoured strips and things like that. We've never really pushed a very, very proactive approach, though, where we really went out and tried to sell it. You know, you turn on your TV and you'll have all sorts of ads. Coca-Cola advertises every day. Why? Because you've got to just keep hammering away if you're going to sell something. And we think it's time to do that in conservation as well.
That's good. One of the wonderful pieces of this program is for a pretty limited state investment, we can draw down, what, $50 million for about 10, 12 million of our dollars. That's
right. In fact, on the buffer initiative, we think about $1.5 million a year over a 5-year period will draw down $50 to $70 million.
Wow.
And these will be rental payments to farmers. So farmers have more money in their pockets. Our water is cleaner. If we do it right, we'll have much more wildlife habitat. You'll see a lot more pheasants out there on the landscape. Landscape looks beautiful. These things really do lend themselves to a beautiful landscape. So we think everybody will win if we do it, and I don't see any reason why the legislature wouldn't want to do it.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the hog lot issue in the context of manure management plans. Are we going to be seeing any proposals to require or to help people do manure management plans on the farm? Yes,
actually a couple of years ago the legislature did take a second step in that. We have that implemented now in any large animal confinement system. We do require manure management plans. We're reviewing those plans. although there are an awful lot of them. But we're finding that where we do, about 25% of those plans don't meet our state requirements. We then get out and we meet with farmers and they make the changes that we need. So we think that that process is beginning to work. More importantly, though, I think we need more flexibility on the siting of these things. Right now, the department is bound by laws that say that separation distance is 1,200 feet, for example. We think that should be a minimum, and you should give us some flexibility. So in those resources such as green belts and things like that, we should get them further away, and we're going to ask for the authority to do that. We also base our management plans right now on the nutrient nitrogen, but in some cases phosphorus is a real problem as well, and so we're going to ask for the authority to where it's important for farmers to base their manure applications on phosphorus as well as nitrogen.
The governor recently, in his State of the State, indicated he would support a bill to provide some local control, I assume, to the supervisors to make siting decisions. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I think it would. Again, I think that, in fact, we talk about local control all the time. Politicians every week talk about how with schools, for example, local control is so important. We believe, too, that in environmental issues, local control is, or certainly local input in it is very, very important. I think people in their home place have to be involved in the health of it. That doesn't mean that everybody should set their own standards. We should have some basic standards, and then we should let communities decide whether they want to be higher than those standards. And that's what the governor proposed last year. He's doing it again this year, and I understand there are 2 or 3 other bills, too, that perhaps could be in the hopper that would refer to the same problem.
Great. I hope we can get a debate on it. Last year we didn't do hardly any legislation helping to try and address either environmental concerns or economic concerns on the farm. We just haven't had the support in the Republican leadership to bring that bill before us.
It's really a difficult issue. We see agriculture changing very, very rapidly. In fact, it's almost frightening to see that after 10,000 years of agriculture, where people have been connected to animals and animals have been connected to land, now we're pulling those things apart. Animals are going into buildings. It's an industrial kind of a model. We don't really know where it's going to take us. On the one hand, though, we're still playing by the rules of the old, and yet it's now an industry similar to a steel mill or something like that almost, or people could argue that, and yet we've got the rules of the old system. It's going to be a tough issue to deal with. I do want to say, though, that we have, even in the larger animal agriculture systems, we have some who are doing very, very well, and by the environment anyway. And then we have others that are not, just as we always had that with the older systems as well. So I don't think we should just with a brush say big is bad, small is good. What we ought to do is try to get the best in whatever model you're going to use.
Very good. Well, I'm visiting with Paul Johnson. He's the Director of Department of Natural Resources here in Iowa. He's also actually a farmer, which I didn't indicate at the top of the show. He farms up in northeast Iowa and has for many years. And he's going to his farm right after this show ends. We are also interested in your ideas about upcoming shows and guests, and you can send us some email if you'd like, and maybe we could slap that up on the screen. We're always dying to get your email. In fact, I got some email just the other day, and I was going to bring it in tonight to share it with you, and I left it in my printer. Next time, viewers, we're going to hear from one of our email viewers. Also, we have a web page. If you want to see who's been on in the past, learn a little bit more about the show, see how you can get involved, take a look at our website and send us your ideas about that as well. Again, we're visiting with Paul Johnson, our new Director of Department of Natural Resources. Paul, air quality has been identified recently by the federal EPA as an issue that we have some concerns with here in Iowa. In fact, Peter Hamlin, the division administrator for the air division of the department, was on recently and indicated that from a public health perspective, Iowans ought to be concerned about the quality of our air. What do we need to be doing about this?
Well, we ought to be concerned. It's a little hard to get people really concerned about something they can't see, and except perhaps for large hog facilities in some industry, we don't smell it either. But nonetheless, we depend on good air. Iowa, by and large, does have good quality air, although some modeling that's been done by EPA, and it's not just Iowa, we're looking across the country, we're beginning to realize that perhaps we ought to pay more attention to some of the volatile organic compounds, things like benzene and things that vaporize very readily. They don't just go away, they are in the atmosphere, and until they're diluted sufficiently, they could cause problems. We have a number of places in Iowa where we do have those concerns, and Iowa up until now has not had a good monitoring program for those. We believe that we ought to start by getting an assessment of where these may be a problem, and then also get going with some monitoring on it. And the governor recently put together a task force of industry and environment and health officials to look at this, and they've just released their report. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to take a look at it, but I think that will come out of it will be an inventory of where we may have problems, and then a monitoring program, and then whatever it takes to get better at it. Just as with so many of these issues, though, we don't have to wait until we count bodies,
Right.
or we don't have to wait until we see the meter go off the scale. We have very good industry in Iowa today that is on top of this already, and then we have others that may not be so much. We're going to really encourage the good industries to help mentor those that are not so good, to share technology and to share ideas. And I think that certainly we need to document it, but at the same time, in most cases, we know how to do it right. Let's get on with doing that.
One of the major sources of air pollution in the state, according to Pete, about 60% of it's attributed to automobiles and
right.
trucks and the like. That's a very difficult issue to deal with. I know we used to have a vehicle inspection program where you'd at least people with cars that have them run cleanly. Any thoughts about what we ought to be encouraging by way of, or is this more of a federal problem in terms of fuel efficiency standards, or is there a statewide handle on this question?
It is, it's difficult to deal at the state level unless you have very, very serious problems such as Los Angeles or New York or Chicago. The governor is recommending that we use more ethanol, of course, and I think it's a good idea, except that I wish that we would produce it in a more efficient way. In other words, we're not necessarily as efficient as we ought to be, even in energy utilization, to produce the corn to make the ethanol. And then the other side of it, as you say, is how we're burning it. Iowa probably has one of the lowest fuel efficiency ratings of its fleet of cars and trucks of any state in the union. We seem to like big vehicles in Iowa. Of course, pickups are a big part of that. Again, this is one of those issues that gets down to every Iowan trying to do better than what we have. And I don't think we can mandate these kinds of things at a state level, certainly. I wish that we would continue to raise the bar at the national level. We did a lot of good back in the 70s when we put in place those efficiency standards. We've really made a difference. We've gotten lead out of gasoline. So we need to recognize that we have made some progress. But what I learned from that is that we can make more if we just set our minds to it, and that's what we have to do. There are new vehicles coming out. Looking at one right now, in fact, that I wouldn't mind purchasing if I could afford it, and that's one that's a combination electric and very efficient 3-cylinder gasoline engine. Gets 70 miles to the gallon.
Wow.
I drive back and forth every weekend to Decorah.
Sure.
It's about 420 miles, and then I drive during the week. I'd like to give it a try, and I wish other Iowans would as well.
Yeah, well, maybe the DNR can get the car for you.
Oh, I don't think I should do that. I have to be careful there.
Well, we've got all these vehicles, state vehicles. We ought to buy a couple that
you're right.
do really well. I mean,
think,
it's not that we're not spending money on expensive, big vehicles in the state,
you got me there, right? We do.
Speaking of energy, the big issue, one of the big issues this legislative session may be the restructuring of electricity in Iowa and how electricity is sold, also known as deregulation.
That's right.
Utility companies very interested in seeing this move forward. The department's been playing kind of a preeminent role in trying to present what the environmental questions are. What are some of those issues that ought to be in a deregulation bill?
Well, we believe that the public interest is best served if we focus not only on deregulation, but also on how the electricity is produced that is sold in Iowa, and then programs to try to make our use of it much more efficient. You know, our goal in the end would be to get all of the services provided by electricity with as little electricity as possible. So for example, lighting, if you can provide the same light using half the electricity, Iowans are going to be better off. Now, if you sell electricity, maybe you're not very happy about that, and that's where the tension often is. But we want the services from electricity, and yet we're so fixed on the electron and not on the services that are provided. And we think that we can do a lot better there. Iowa needs to. We don't produce much of our own electricity, and that's a huge drain on our economy. Those dollars leave Iowa without producing a single job, about 80% of it. So we think that on the one hand, we've got to be more efficient. And what we're asking for is an energy efficiency fund if we go to deregulation. So anybody selling electricity in Iowa, the consumer would be paying a little bit, we'd be turning around and really encouraging efficiency. A second part of it is to try to encourage more homegrown energy. Most Iowans don't realize it, but we already rank third in the nation in energy produced from wind.
Wow.
We've had a couple of very large wind farms go on in north central Iowa. We have the potential to produce an awful lot more. And so what we're also recommending is that if you're going to sell electricity in Iowa, a certain percentage of that should be produced from renewable sources and not from fossil fuels. Iowa probably won't change the world in something like this other than we will set an example. And I think there's a real need for that around the world today as we look at global climate change. And so what we're saying is that we would like to set some standards that other states will follow, and that we should generate some of our own electricity, whether it be more wind farms. Iowa also probably has the greatest potential in the nation for biofuels, whether it be a production of switchgrass, for example, that can be burned directly, or whether you produce methane from these hog lagoons and pits. We have a number of opportunities here, and we think that if we put some effort towards it, Iowa will be a better place, and a place that the rest of the world can look to.
So we anticipate some action maybe this year, but it's still unclear. In terms of efficiency, what are you talking about? Helping people change light, putting in more efficient light bulbs and water heater blankets and that, and thermostats. I know a few years ago, the legislation that you passed in the early 90s had the utility company helping all of us by coming to our house, putting on the water heater blanket,
That's right.
buying, giving us some money for insulation.
We
Is
did
that
that.
what we think?
Yes, and
more than that?
the amazing thing about efficiencies are that about the time you get a good one in, there's another one that's better. So it's going to be an ongoing process. We did make a difference with that legislation we did in 1990. We've spared Iowa one very large power plant. We don't have to build it today. We have what we call negawatts instead of megawatts. In other words, instead of producing electricity, we're producing services much more efficiently.
Great.
That means a cleaner atmosphere. It means more money in Iowa's pockets over the long haul. So there's a whole host of things like this, and whether it be in more efficient heating systems, more efficient motors to run our industry, a broad array of things. And it's a fairly exciting field. I'd like to see more Iowans get involved in it.
Great. Another issue this legislative session may be a discussion about repeal or expansion of our bottle redemption law. You get 5 cents for your bottle when you pay, and then you pick it up. And what's your sense of the bottle bill? Has it been effective? Are there ways to improve it in your mind?
You know, there's probably no piece of environmental legislation done in Iowa in the last 25 years, and that one's about that old now, that has been more popular with people. A very, very high percentage of Iowans are very proud of the fact that they do this. And in fact, of all the states that have bottle bills, and there's only about 8 or 10, I believe, Iowa ranks #1 by far in the return of those beverage containers. We have one group in Iowa that says that we ought to expand it, that we've got an awful lot of beverage containers now that really ought to be part of that. And then we have another group that would like to see an alternative. Our view is that I doubt very much that Iowans would want to give it up unless there's something very, very good to replace it with. We're waiting to see what that is, but we haven't seen it yet.
Sure. So it would be interesting to see how that debate comes. We're down to our last couple minutes here. Any messages for Iowans? I know you've talked about personal stewardship a lot on a number of these issues. It's that you've got like 1,000 employees or approximately at the department, and you're doing your part, but cleaning up, making sure Iowa's environment is solidly taken care of is really a personal responsibility of all of us.
Yes, it is, and I think that we have many opportunities for Iowans to be involved, whether it be through watershed coalitions developing. The governor has declared this year Earth Year 2000. 30 years ago we had Earth Day 2000, and it made quite a difference. We have some very good laws in the country today because of that, and I think our country's healthier. We'd like to get Iowans involved this year in their hometowns and in their communities. Take part in Earth Year 2000 as we unravel it or unroll it this year. The governor has also called for full funding of REAP, the Resource Enhancement and Protection Program. We promised that to Iowans 10 years ago. We're only halfway there. We're at about $10.5 million a year. The governor says that we ought to go to 20, and most of us agree. In fact, most of us feel we could use 40 instead of 20. And this goes to your local county conservation boards, it goes to soil and water conservation districts, it goes to city parks, open spaces that the state purchases and maintains. It's a wonderful program, one of the best in the country. We think this is the year to do it. It will be done if citizens across this state ask their legislators to do it, and we hope they'll do that. So.
Great. Paul, appreciate you being with us today on the show. I know you're working hard. Your legislative agenda is huge, and it's great to have you in this position. I know it's with some personal sacrifice to do all this work, but Iowans appreciate it.
Well, I feel fortunate to be part of this process. Iowa's a great state. Let's work at it, and I think we can make it better.
Terrific. We've been visiting with Paul Johnson, the Director of the Department of Natural Resources. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. Our next show, actually, we're going to be talking about Iowa's bottle redemption law with a couple people on either side of that issue. So stay tuned for that. Appreciate you tuning in. I'd like to thank the crew for all their work and welcome our newest crew member, Karen Cubby, who's joining us for the first time on the crew, so to speak. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. We'll see you next time.